So this is going to be a real quick recap from last week's lesson on unified land operations and the offense.
It was the large.
So real quick, we talked briefly about the tenets of unified land operations and how there are no longer 7, there are 4. All right. So in the doctrinal reference for this is going to be ADP 1. ADP 3-0 operations, ADP 3-90 offense and defense, as well as the ADRPs. So when we go to the Army, ADP 1, we said that the mission of the Army was to fight and win the nation's wars through prompt and sustained land combat as part of the joint force, right? So to fight and win the nation's wars being the mission of the Army. And specifically, it talks about how it derives the mission from the Constitution. And so people that are much smarter than us came up with the information from the Constitution. And then the mission of the United States Army is to fight and win the nation's wars through prompt and sustained land combat as part of the joint force. All right, so how do we do that? Obviously, it explains it there, but in the Army operating concept or unified land operations, we are tasked with 4 things in decisive action, that being the offense, defense, stability, and defense and support of civil authorities tasks. So remember this chart that we looked at last week. So this is showing how everything is kind of nested together. So if anyone ever says, what is the Army operational concept, you know that it's unified land operations. So these are the new tenets of unified land operations of simultaneity. I think that's how you pronounce that. Depth, synchronization, and flexibility. All right, so these are just some definitions. You could always look up this stuff in ADRP 1-02 terms and graphics to go more into what the difference of these are, as well as campaigns, and operations, so on and so forth. Alright, so specifically of the offense. Alright, so these are some of the purposes: defeat, destroy, or neutralize. The characteristics of the offense being audacity, concentration, surprise, and tempo. Alright, so to go further into that, alright, again, we pull up the offensive task. Alright, so the doctrine that covers that is ADP and ADRP 3-90. Alright, so the offense. Alright, so this breaks down the purposes of the offense. Again, we see defeat, destroy, or neutralize. Okay, the characteristics of the offense, and it breaks down each audacity, concentration, surprise, and tempo. All right, so it gives a further explanation of each thing. And then it also talks about the different tasks being movement to contact, attack, exploitation, and pursuit. So it provides you the more detailed explanation. And so last week we also talked about how the ADPs are kind of like the Cliff Notes version of the doctrine, and then the ADRPs kind of take it a step further. All right, so and it explains the concepts even more. All right, so it's about 3 times the size, or 4 times the size of the ADP, the ADRP. All right, so when you look at the offense, it really breaks all of this stuff down and even goes into control measures, forms of maneuver, planning consideration, and transitions. All right, so that's in chapter 3. All right, so again, it talked about the characteristics. So you see them there, characteristics of the offense. So another thing that I want to highlight again is that the offense is the decisive form of war. All right, so it gives you the Army explanation of what offensive operations are, but at the end of the day, the offense is the decisive form of war. And that being said, since it's the decisive form of war, we go back to what our doctrinal mission is in the Army, and that is to fight and win the nation's wars through prompt and sustained land combat as part of the joint force. So an ADP 3-90 specifies that the offense is the decisive form of war. Okay, so what does that mean exactly? Well, it means that without offense, you cannot win. You cannot achieve victory. So when you think of the resources that are committed to war, people as well as money, there should be the end state of victory. And so, you could look at it as two sides are shooting at each other, and depending on the proficiency of the shooters, they may or may not be hitting each other. They could be suppressing them, but at the end of the day, it's going to take someone from either side to get up and move over to where the other one is at to close with and destroy. And that is basically the offense summarized. Like, you can't claim victory without going over there and destroying, defeating, or neutralizing the enemy, right? So that's the purpose of the offense. Okay, so again, how is everything nested together? You've got ADP 1, the Army, right? And it talks about the Army's mission. And at this point, I think we've beat that. All right? Beat that horse. So it's to fight and win the nation's wars through prompt and sustained land combat as part of the joint force. Okay, that's what we do in the Army. That's our mission. So how do we do that? And it talks about it a little bit here, organizing, equipping, and training. But at the end of the day, we have our how we fight, basically, right? And that is explained through unified land operations, which is our operational concept, Army operational concept. Don't be surprised if you see the question, what is the Army operational concept, on your final exam, and you are expected to know that it is unified land operations. All right. And so underneath that, it's executed through decisive action. All right. With the offensive, defensive, stability, and DISCA, or defense and support of civil authorities tasks. All right. So that is how the offense is nested with decisive action, which is nested with unified land operations, which is nested with unified action, and the conduct of joint operations. All right. All right, and so ADP 3-90 is the offense and defense. Gives you kind of the conceptual overview of what the offense is. And then the ADRP 3-90, which is offense and defense, kind of goes a little bit more in depth. And then if you want to know how to do a movement to contact, which is an offensive task, all right, you would go into the field manual 3-90, and it would explain how to actually do a movement to contact and all of the various collective and supporting tasks necessary to be able to do that. All right, so audacity, concentration, surprise, tempo are the characteristics of the offense, and then you've got the different offensive tasks of movement to contact, attack. All right, so specifically the attack destroys or defeats an enemy force, which is one of the purposes of the offense. Okay, so when we talk about the concept of nesting, right, movement to contact allows you to establish or regain contact with the enemy. Then you transition to attack, which is how you destroy or defeat the enemy, which is the whole purpose of the offense, which is the decisive form of war, which in our mission as the Army is to fight and win the nation's wars through prompt and sustained land combat as part of the joint force. All right, and then there's some additional definitions there. All right, control measures, assault positions, assault times, attack by fire. So you could read that. All right, it's pretty amazing what reading will do for you as far as learning these concepts. So give it a try sometime. All right, so the next lesson is on the defense.